Swann's Way, starting at page 67. Even in Paris, in one of the ugliest parts of the city, I know a window from which you can see, beyond a foreground, middle ground, and even third ground composed of the piled-up roofs of several streets, a violet bell, sometimes ruddy, sometimes also in the noblest proofs of it printed by the atmosphere, a decanted cindery black, which is in fact the dome of St. Augustine, and which gives this view of Paris the character of certain views of Rome by Piranesi. But since into none of these little engravings, with whatever taste my memory may have executed them, was it able to put what I had lost a long time ago, the feeling that makes us not consider a thing a spectacle, but believe in it as a creature without equivalence. None of them holds in subjection an entire profound part of my life, as does the memory of those views of the Cambrai steeple from the street behind the church. Whether we saw at 5 o'clock when we went to get the letters at the post office, a few houses away from us, to the left, abruptly lifted with an isolated peak the ridge line of the roofs, or whether, on the other hand, if we wanted to go in to ask for news of Madame Cesaret, and our eyes followed that line low again after the descent of its other slope, knowing we would have to turn at the second street after the steeple, or whether again going on farther. If we went to the station, we saw it obliquely, showing in profile new edges and surfaces, like a solid caught at an unfamiliar moment of its revolution. Or whether from the banks of the Vivonne, the apse, muscularly gathered and raised to a greater height by the perspective, seemed to spring with the effort the steeple was making to hurl its spire into the heart of the sky. It was also to the steeple that we had to return. Always the steeple that dominated everything, summing up the houses with an unexpected pinnacle, raised before me like the fingers of God, whose body might be hidden in the crowd of humans, though I would not confuse it with them because of that. And even today, if in a large provincial town or part of Paris I do not know well, a passing stranger who has put me on the right path shows me in the distance, as a reference point, some hospital belfry, some convent steeple lifting the peak of its ecclesiastical cap at the corner of a street I am supposed to take, if only my memory can obscurely find it in some small feature resembling the dear departed form, the stranger, if he turns around to make sure I am not going astray, may, to his astonishment, see me forgetting the walk I had begun, or the necessary errand, remain there in front of the steeple for hours, motionless, trying to remember, feeling deep in myself lands recovered from oblivion, draining and rebuilding themselves. And then, no doubt, and more anxiously than a short time before when I asked him to direct me, I am still seeking my path. I am turning a corner, but I am doing so in my heart. As we returned home from Mass, we would often meet Monsieur Le Grandin, who was detained in Paris by his profession of engineer and, except during the summer vacation, could come to his property in Cambrai only from Saturday until Monday morning. He was one of those men who, quite apart from a career in science in which they had in fact been brilliantly successful, possess an entirely different culture, one that is literary, artistic, which their profession specialization does not make use of, and which enriches their conversation. Better read than many men of letters, we did not know at the time that Monsieur Legendre had a certain reputation as a writer, and we were very surprised to see that a famous musician had composed a melody to some verse of his. Gifted with facility more facility than many painters, they imagine that the life they are leading is not the one that really suits them, and they bring to their actual occupations either an indifference mingled with whimsy or an application that is sustained and haughty, scornful, bitter, and conscientious. Tall, with a handsome figure, a fine, thoughtful face, with a long, blonde mustache, and disenchanted blue eyes, exquisitely courteous, a conversationalist such as we had never before heard. He was, in the eyes of my family, who always cited him as an example, the epitome of the superior man, approaching life in the noblest and most delicate way. My grandmother reproached him only for speaking a little too well, a little too much like a book, for not having the same naturalness in his language as in his loosely knotted lavalier bow ties, in his short, straight, almost schoolboyish coat. She was also surprised by the fiery tirades he often launched against the aristocracy, against fashionable life, against snobbery. Certainly, the sin which St. Paul has in mind when he speaks of, the sin for which there is no forgiveness. Worldly ambition was a sentiment that my grandmother was so incapable of feeling, or even almost of understanding, that it seemed to her pointless to bring so much ardor to stigmatizing it. What was more, she did not think it in very good taste that Monsieur de Jardin, whose sister Nell Balbec was married to a titled gentleman of Lower Normandy, should indulge himself in such violent attacks against the nobility, going so far as to reproach the Revolution for not having had them guillotined. "Greetings, my friends," he would say, coming up to us. "How fortunate you are to live here for such extended periods of time. Tomorrow I must return to Paris, to my little nook. Oh," he would add, with his own peculiar smile, gently ironical, disappointed, and slightly distracted, "of course my house contains every useless thing in the world. It lacks only one essential, a large piece of sky like this one." He would add, turning to me, "You have a lovely soul, of a very rare quality, an artist's nature. Don't ever let it go without what it needs." When we returned home, my aunt sent to ask if Madame Goupil had been late coming to Mass. We would not give her any information. Instead, we increased her disturbance by telling her that there was a painter at work in the church copying the window of Gilbert the Mad. Francois immediately was sent to the grocery, came back empty-handed, owing to the absence of Theodore, whose two professions, that of chorister, with a part in the maintenance of the church, and of grocer's boy, gave him connections in all worlds, and therefore knowledge that was universal. "Oh," sighed my aunt, "I wish it were time for Eulalie. She's really the only one who will be able to tell me." Eulalie was an active old maid, lame and hard of hearing, who had retired after the death of Madame de la Bretonnerie, with whom she had been in service since her childhood, and had then taken a room next to the church, descending from it constantly, either for the service or, when there was no service, to say a little prayer or give Theodore a hand. The rest of the time she visited invalids like my Aunt Leonie, to whom she would describe what happened at Mass or at Vespers. She was not above adding some revenue to the small pension paid by her the family of her former employees, by going from time to time to look after the cure's linen, or or that of some other prominent personality in Combray's clerical world. Above a cloak of black cloth, she wore only a small white hood, almost like a nun's, and a skin disease gave parts of her cheeks and her hooked nose the bright pink tones of an impatience. Her visits were the great diversions my Aunt Leonie, who hardly received anyone else now, apart from Monsieur de la Cure. My aunt had gradually eliminated all the other visitors because all of them made the mistake, in her eye, of belonging to one of two categories of people she detested. One group, the worst, whom she had got rid of first, were the ones who advised her not to listen to herself, so and subscribed, if only negatively, manifesting it only by certain disapproving silences or certain dubious smiles, to the subversive doctrine that a little walk in the sun and a good rare beefsteak, even though 2 wretched sips of Vichy water would lie on her stomach for 14 hours, would do her more good than bed and her medicines. The other category was made up of the people who seemed to believe she was more seriously ill than she thought, that she was as seriously ill as she said she was. And so, though she had allowed to come up after some hesitation, and upon Francois's kindly meant entreaties, and who in the course of their visit had shown how very unworthy they were of the favor of being done them, who in the course of their visits had shown how very unworthy they were of the favor being done them by timidly risking a "Don't you think that if you were able to move about when the weather's fine?" Or who, on the contrary, when she said to them, "I'm very low, this is the end, my poor friends," answered her, "Ah, when our health fails us, still you may last a while longer yet as you are." These, the former, as well as these, the latter, were certain never to be received again. And if Francois was amused by my aunt's horrified look when from her bed she saw one of these people in the Rue Saint-Esprit apparently coming towards her house, or when she heard the doorbell ring, she would laugh more heartily still, as though at a good trick, at my aunt's ever victorious ruses for managing to have them turned away, and at their discomforted expressions as they went off without having seen her, and at heart admired her mistress, whom she felt to be superior to all these people, since she did not want to receive them. In short, my aunt required that her visitors at the time commended her on her regimen, commiserate with her for her suffering, and encourage her as to her future. This was where Eulalie excelled. My aunt might say to her 20 times in a minute, "This is the end, my poor Eulalie." 20 times Eulalie would answer, "Knowing your illness as you know it, Madame Octave, you will live to be 100. And as Madame Cesarin was saying to me just yesterday, one of Eulalie's firmest beliefs, which the impressive number of denials contributed by experience had not been enough to shake, was that Madame Cesarat's name was Madame Cesarin. "I am not asking to live to 100, answered my aunt, who preferred not to see her days assigned a precise term. And since, along with this, Eulalie knew better than anyone else how to distract my aunt without tiring her, her visits, which took place regularly every Sunday, barring an unforeseen obstacle, were for my aunt a pleasure, the prospect of which kept her on those days in a state that was at first pleasant, but quite soon painful, like an excessive hunger, if Eulalie was even a little late. Overly prolonged, this ecstasy of waiting for Eulalie became a torment. My aunt looked constantly at the time, yawned, felt faint. The sound of Eulalie's chime, if it came at the very end of the day, when she was no longer expecting it, would almost make her ill. The fact that on Sunday she thought only of this visit, and as soon as lunch was finished, Francois would be in a hurry for us to leave the dining room so that she could go up and occupy my aunt. But especially once the finer weather settled in at Combray, a good long time would go by after the haughty hour of noon, descending from St. Hilaire's steeple, which it had emblazoned with the 12 momentary rosettes of its sonorous crown, had echoed around our table, close to the consecrated bread which had also come in, familiarity after church, while we remained sitting in front of the 1001 Nights plates. Oppressed by the heat, especially by the meal, for upon a permanent foundation of eggs, cutlets, potatoes, biscuits, which she no longer even announced to us, Francois would add, depending on the labors in the fields and orchards, fruit of the tide, luck of the marketplace, the kindness of the neighbors, her own genius, and with the result that our menu, like the quatre feuilles carved on the portals of the cathedrals in the 13th century, reflected somewhat the rhythm of the seasons and the incidents of daily life. A brill became the monger had guaranteed a brill because the monger had guaranteed her that it was fresh, a turkey because she had seen a large one at the Rosenville-le-Pin market, cardoons with marrow because she had not made them for us that way before, a roast leg of mutton because... Okay, that's page 72. I have to take this call.